Who's behind the Moro conflict? The Moros were the indigenous people in the Philippines. They belong to the different ethno-linguistic groups in Mindanao, southern region of the Philippines. The Moro minority makes up 15% of the population of the Catholic-dominated the Philippines. Before the Spaniards came, there was inhabitants in the Philippines who chose to accept Islam, a faith brought into the country by trade with Brunei, Malaysia, and Indonesia in the 13th to 14th century that led to the establishment of Muslim communities, which fought two colonizers. First, the Spaniards, whom they resisted from the 16th to 19th century in one of the world's longest anti-colonial wars. What was the root cause of the seemingly never-ending Moro conflict in Mindanao? Moro conflict started with the history of injustice and marginalization that was felt by the Moros and have been misinterpreted in historical texts that added to the misunderstanding and distortion of their image in the present. Back in the 1890s, when the Spaniards ceded the Philippines to the United States with the Treaty of Paris. Then the US annexed the Philippines, including the Moro areas of Mindanao and Sulu. When the nation gained independence in 1946, it included the territories inhabited by the Moro people. In the late 1960s, the conflict between the Moro and Christian communities escalated and peaked in the mid-1970s. 150,000 is estimated number of the people died in the conflict between the Moro Muslims and the government of the Philippines. An armed group emerged called the Moro National Liberation Front, and that is when the government had a peace agreement to the Moro National Liberation Front. In 1996, after that, another group also emerged, which is the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. In 1997, the government started negotiation with these other groups. The MILF is one of the largest armed resistance groups fielded with some 30,000 armed fighters, and the Philippine military deployed up to 80% of its combat forces against them. Around 50,000 people were killed and there was a huge destruction. What were the strategies pursued by the government of the Philippines to solve the conflict? In late 1976, talks between the government and the Moro began and have continued on and off for decades with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front as the largest Muslim group. A deal was finally reached in 2014, paving the way for the new law as the Filipino former President Rodrigo Roa Duterte signed the Bangsamoro Organic Law, which grants partial autonomy to the Muslims in the South after a 5-decade war.
So government found it more important to have this with the MILF instead of spending billions of pesos in the purchase of weapons and ammunition, because to them, the war in Mindanao cannot be won by either side. Of course, we cannot win over government, especially on conventional warfare, but neither government can trust the MNLF and the MILF, especially when we resort to a non-conventional mode of fighting, which means guerrilla warfare.
The law signed by the former President Duterte, the Moro people has more control on their finances. 75% of the regional internal revenue collection would go to the Bangsamoro and 25% to the government. There would be an 80-member of the parliament, and the Islamic law would be incorporated into the region's justice system. Now, people living in the areas of Mindanao covered by the agreement. But security would stay with the central government, meaning the Bangsamoro could have their own military and police forces. The Moro Islamic Liberation Front would have to disband its army.
Our recommendation to solve the conflict. Our group recommends to solve the said conflict of Moro people between the government, as mentioned that it is started in history of injustice and marginalization that was felt by the Moros, and many of our fellow Filipino people have died because of this never-ending conflict. So, we still refer the sustainable peace talk between the Moro Islamic Liberation Front be keeping the government ward for the Moros to avoid the amount of people that could be killed. The infrastructure that could be destroyed and finally promote peace after the continued on and off for decades.